Let's talk about the box that a lot of people didn't feel was checked coming into the season. Some people still don't feel that way. I want to have a conversation about Will Howard, and I want to go back to the beginning when it was announced that he was coming, when we all, kind of dug into who Will was as a quarterback, our expectations, the knock on him, obviously, the deep ball. We'd seen the stats. They weren't so hot. More than 20 yards downfield. He was like something like 75th in the country. It wasn't so good. His completion percentage may be a bigger concern in his career, 53%, 54%, 59%, and last year, 61%. We knew that Kansas State was ready to move on from him and move on to Avery Johnson, which I didn't take as a total shun. You kind of can understand. He's a hometown boy, one of the biggest recruits they've ever had. They're really excited about him. And the interceptions as well. But what was good about him, the RPO game he really excelled at, stellar inside the 20, could run. But many people thought this was not going to be an upgrade from Kyle McCord. Many people were irritated that this was the guy Ohio State chose out of the options in the transfer portal. I was of the opinion that this was definitely an upgrade. And while he was limited, he was maybe just what they needed if they took advantage of his skill set. I'm pretty sure you felt similarly. Am I far off?
No, not at all. Look, I wanted Cam Ward. We're talking about just the player himself,
Mhm.
and when we were talking about transfer quarterbacks back in that at that time, I wanted Cam Ward just in terms of we're just talking about the player himself. I said, go pay Cam Ward. I understand there were other things that factored into that, as is the case with any player or recruit for that matter. But when it came down to Will Howard, and certainly the moment that Chip Kelly came to Columbus, the moment he was hired, those two pieces together, I thought, yes, this is Ohio State handled this about as well as they could. Maybe it was partially, luck. So they fell into Chip Kelly after already having Will on board. But after that happened, I thought Will Howard was just a fine fit for this offense. I never understood comparing him to Kyle McCord or saying that this was a lateral move, moving on from Kyle McCord and moving to Will Howard was a lateral move. Didn't understand that at all. I never understood that. So, I was generally excited about Will Howard when they brought him in. Certainly after the Chip Kelly hire, I thought that was a really good match for Ohio State's offense. Funny thing is, it hasn't really played out the way I thought it would in terms of Will Howard being in Chip Kelly's offense. But still, the end result has been, I think it's been a really good relationship, those two guys.
So you would say he's exceeded your expectations?
Yeah. I don't want to say he's blown them away, but he's exceeded them. Yes. I think it's 2,200 yards, 22 touchdowns, 5 interceptions through.
I'll pull it up here. Let's pull it up and we can take a look at it.
Through 9 games. So, yeah. And I mean, obviously statistics don't show the whole thing. One thing I'll add, while he hasn't been the biggest rushing threat that we thought he would be, those 6 rushing touchdowns never get talked about when we're talking. If you want to talk about, I don't think Will Howard should be, firmly in the Heisman conversation. I don't, but there's certainly an argument to be made to say, hey, hold on here. Look at these stat lines here. Why not? He's the quarterback of a one-loss Ohio State team that's number 2.
We're going to talk about a couple of those. Yeah.
But one thing that never gets talked about is those 6 rushing touchdowns, which do exist, people. So you want to talk about 22 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. Well, talk about 28 overall touchdowns because those do exist. So anyways.
Absolutely. So I was just kind of taking a step back, remembering the expectations, because I've seen Ohio State getting knocked by some Buckeye fans just this last week for not taking Cam Ward. And while, I was with you, I thought, that was the more exciting play to go after Cam Ward. This wasn't some obvious slam dunk. Like they were both, NFL scouts had them both rated as 5th round picks. These are, one wasn't. Cam Ward certainly had his knocks, right? Like we saw the highlights. They were great. There was also a lot more lowlights than Will had. And you never know if you're going to get that out of somebody or if you're going to be able to turn him around. He's turned around in Miami. Good for him. But that wasn't some slam dunk decision. And bringing in a guy with a lot of risk maybe wasn't the best idea on this team. Regardless, the expectations for Will Howard were pretty low. The PFF expectations, for instance, had him behind guys like Riley Leonard, Grayson McCall, who's since retired, DJU at Florida State. That didn't turn out so hot. KJ Jefferson at UCF, Connor Wegman at Texas A&M, who's been benched for a freshman. He was 27th out of 27, or 27th on their quarterback list. And I'm just reminding myself of all these expectations. And the biggest knock, the accuracy, which was a huge concern. This year, Will Howard, 74%. which puts him number 2 in the nation at over 100 passing attempts. The Heisman frontrunner, Dylan Gabriel, just 0.1 percentage point above Will. Number 2 in accuracy, and everybody talked about the talent would help him. Not like that. That's 13 percentage points. I mean, that's a guy who's seriously improved. Not to mention his depth of target much deeper than Dylan Gabriel. So, more difficult passes. I would say he's the most accurate quarterback in the country at this point with that percentage. That's crazy, man. I never would have guessed that this guy with those accuracy issues would be a top 3 completion percentage guy in the country. How about passing touchdowns? Tied for 6th in the country. That's not even factoring in those 6 touchdowns. Quarterback rating, 5th in the country. Sacks, 112th in the country. Red zone offense. Ohio State's red zone offense in 2023. They scored a touchdown 64% of the time in the red zone. This season, Ohio State is scoring a touchdown 88% of the time in the red zone. That's first place. Go ahead.
No, I think that's probably one of the things where when you ask me if he's exceeded expectations, one of my biggest things for Will Howard is how good Ohio State's been in the red zone, and it's a big part of that is certainly Will Howard for multiple reasons.
It's something we overlook, isn't it? I mean, it's absolutely. Like it's got to be one of the biggest stats for an offense. But when you look at this Ohio State, sure you can say Chip's done a lot of it, but we look back to last year, Will Howard's Kansas State offense was number 1 in that stat too. So this has definitely got a lot to do with Will Howard. And what I'm getting at here is I think we all collectively had pretty reasonable baseline expectations. This guy has absolutely destroyed those expectations. I did not think for a second he would be anywhere near top 5 in any of those categories I just talked about. Like, not for a second. I mean, in my wildest dreams I did, but if you ask me, like, what are your expectations? Top 15-ish in most of those kind of categories. And then you would get some more off his leadership, which, by the way, staggeringly great, the type of guy you want representing your institution. When you see him at the press conferences, when you see the guys react to him, tough as an offensive lineman, like, sign me up, man. Sign me up. If we would have known this ahead of time, absolutely. So he's exceeded these expectations by far. And I just want to point that out because he's getting some crap here and there. And I'm just like, hold on. Let's talk about him in the biggest moments. Yeah. Against Oregon, he drove him down the field. And if JJ doesn't get that penalty, they're in very makeable field goal range. Well, right?
Yeah. Even before that, I mean, he was 6 of 8 on the field goal drive to take the lead in the fourth quarter. He was 6 of 8 on that drive. I mean, he had multiple drives in the first half where he was, money. I don't know.
The Nebraska game, that was a a drive to win the game. The Penn State game, while not good, he immediately snapped out from those poor plays. When we see a lot of people, that eats him up. He snapped out of it. And you won the game, and the ball was in his hands, getting a first down at the end. I just think that he's been a bit undersold as maybe a potential weakness on this team, and I think he's really been a strength.
Oh, I entirely agree, without a doubt. Look, there's certainly an element of, Ohio State's weapons, helping him out, which that's not a knock on Will Howard. Anybody would be so fortunate to have that. Oh, by the way, if you go to the NFL and look at some of these quarterbacks and the guys they've had to throw to through the years, like that matters. Like, that's part of it. That's why you hear guys talk about, they wouldn't be where they were at without, whether it's an offensive line or the weapons they've had, the players they've had. That's part of the game of football. So there's certainly an element of that, but he's absolutely been an asset, a weapon. And you talked about his leadership as well, and something that you can't quantify or you can't, it's not a tangible thing that you can talk about or, point to. It's certainly one of the best elements on the team in terms of leadership. Personally, it's been a joy to watch him and cover him. Just getting to talk to him, how real he is in the post game, how forthcoming he is and willing to share, why he does things, what happened here, his willingness to own it. It's been a joy to watch him. But in terms of just the football team itself, he's been an asset. I don't understand how anybody could think otherwise. He's not CJ Stroud. Ohio State doesn't need him to be CJ Stroud. He's never going to be
just one CJ Stroud.
Yeah, exactly. So, and he's not even in this, you're not even in the same, conversation in terms of just pure quarterback talent that CJ is, but they don't need Ohio State doesn't need him to be. Ohio State needs him to be everything he has been. Just don't turn the football over in big football games. And so, I think it's been great, better than I could have imagined.
I went from a hopeful skeptic to a Will Howard guy, man. I'm a Will Howard guy now, but I do want to look. And you brought up the Heisman. No, he's not a serious Heisman contender, but let's take a look at those Heisman odds where he currently sits 12th behind guys like Bryson Daly, Cade Klubnik, Quinn Ewers, who, I mean, when we look at some of these stats here, so we've looked at Wills and 28 total touchdowns, 2,700 yards. We know about the quarterback, the completion percentage and all those other stats. We look at Dylan Gabriel, who's played one more game than him. So
he has almost 100 more attempts. He threw the ball 49 against Idaho because he had to in that game.
I mean, these are pretty damn similar. We look at yours.
Yeah.
I mean, his numbers aren't even close. How about Cade Klubnik? Damn near identical numbers, quarterback in Clemson, who has had a pretty down year. The kid from Army, who, hey, all respect. We just had Veterans Day. Love the kid, but he's ahead of Will.
Right.
And even a guy like Shedeur Sanders, who's, you know, kind of been tearing it up this year.
Yeah.
Will Howard's numbers pretty damn close to him. So I just think it's time that we at least recognize, like, this is not some guy who's just come here and been average. He's been very, very good.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. You know, if I had a Heisman vote, and I don't, but like if I had a Heisman vote and it had to be just quarterbacks, I don't think he's probably one of my top 2 votes. But to not even having the conversation and to have him behind some of the guys, I hadn't seen the odds until yesterday, and I heard some people talking about it, and I was blown away by some of the guys they have in front of him. It's just wild, just wild. Yeah, he probably wouldn't be one of my first 2 quarterbacks I would vote for, but at the same time, the fact that he's not even in the conversation or nobody's even considering the fact that you know, he's been one of the better quarterbacks in the country this season.
Well, I'll say this: if this year wasn't, so this year is kind of unique where we got 2 outside quarterback position players and Travis Hunter and Ashton Genty, who are going to be in New York. But if that wasn't the case, I think he'd have a shot with a couple of good games down the stretch here to get to New York. And that would be a huge accomplishment from what we thought he would be. But
I totally agree with that. You know, if those guys didn't exist, but they do. So, but I mean, bottom line is just give the guys, I'm not saying he needs to be in New York ceremony. Just give the guys flowers and say, oh man, Will Howard's been one of the best quarterbacks in the country because he deserves as much. So